Dear partners, dear colleagues, dear friends, a very warm welcome to session number 9. Session number 9 of our GAWBL Connect virtual meeting series. What a pleasure and honor indeed to have you with us today. Proudly, we are partnering with the SANA Technical Assistance Facilities in this important virtual event series. So a massive thank you to our long-standing partners and friends at Finance in Motion and SANATAF for another outstanding cooperation. And here in particular to Elvira Lefting, Katharina Morten and Almudena Marquez. As you can see, one hand does not clap, so together as partners, we are so happy to see that our GAWBL platform, which we founded to connect, to empower, to engage with women and men across Germany, the Arab world, and the international community, is constantly growing. And this is even more important in these still challenging times. It is important. And so is gender smart finance. Yes, it matters. Yes, it is a business case. So in today's session, we will discuss valuable insights from our experienced financial sector players into recent studies on gender balance and their key findings that will definitely help identify best practices and strategies. And this is why I'm all the more excited to welcome now our fantastic moderator and speakers today, sharing their enormous and very hands-on expertise and show how to really walk the talk. And maybe you can hear my verbal drum roll now. Please join me in welcoming Emma McCarthy, Head at Sustainable Policy Institute at OMFIF, which is the official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum. You are joining us from London, Emma. A very warm welcome.
Thank you.
Very warm welcome to Minouche Abdelmegid, CEO at Mezan. You are joining us today from Cairo. And another very, very warm welcome goes to Amal Aynan. You are partner at 500 Global, joining us today from Dubai. What a pleasure indeed to have you with us today. And we agreed beforehand that you will all introduce yourself in more detail in a moment. So now it is my deep honor and great pleasure to introduce to you our wonderful moderator of today's session, Alexander Reviakin. Alexander, you are an independent consultant on inclusive and sustainable financing at Finance in Motion, based in London, Frankfurt, the Middle East, almost all over, having held research, management, and consulting roles in public and private organizations in Europe and the Arab world. And you are focused on financial innovation, gender equity, and sustainability. Alongside this consultancy work, you are running Rakiza, an NGO focused on financial inclusion and financial literacy in the MENA region. And what I found particularly stunning, you manage LVPX, an embroidery and upcycling initiative working with artisans in Lebanon. Alexander, you are holding an honors degree in Arabic, International Relations, and History of Art from the University of Durham. And not to mention that you speak French, Spanish, Arabic, and Russian. What an impressive CV. I have to mention this, Alexander. So what an impressive CV. And to be honest, I couldn't think of a better moderator for today's topic, given, you know, your hands-on expertise in so many different areas of financial inclusion. So thank you for having accepted to be the moderator of today. A very warm welcome to you all, and looking into this virtual round of concentrated FinPower, I am all the more looking forward to an insightful, inspiring, and engaging session. And now, Alexander, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gabi. I don't think I've ever had such a wonderful introduction, so thank you. And thank you to you all for joining us. As Gabi mentioned, today we'll be discussing a very important topic, that is the role of women in leadership positions within the financial industry, gender smart finance. I won't introduce myself again, but I'll launch into a bit of an introduction and then let our panelists introduce themselves. Research has shown us that companies with more diverse leadership teams perform better, they're more innovative, and they achieve higher performances. McKinsey, I can give you some stats. McKinsey has found that companies with the most gender diversity on their executive teams are 21% more likely to have above average profitability. Peterson Institute for International Economics has shown that companies with at least 30% female leaders have net margins that are 6 percentage points higher than companies with no women in leadership. We have the evidence that shows us there's a compelling business case for promoting gender diversity. And yet, despite significant progress, women still face challenges and barriers to achieve these leadership positions. Globally, women hold only 20% of board seats and 23% of senior leadership positions in financial services. And if we double down onto the Middle East, which is my expertise, that drops to 11%. And so we have a long way to go. And that's why it's wonderful to have this webinar where we can explore some of the evidence surrounding women in finance and the challenges and opportunities they face. So we'll discuss the strategies for promoting gender diversity and inclusion, including the benefits of mentorship, effective policies, and data collection, and how we can create a culture of inclusivity. Our panel of distinguished speakers are experts in the financial industry and leaders in promoting gender diversity and inclusion, and it's a real pleasure to have you all here. They will be sharing their insights, experiences, and then we'll move to discussion with the audience. So as I said, I'll let each of you introduce yourselves. Emma, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thank you, Alexander. Yeah, as Gabi kindly said, I am head of the Sustainable Policy Institute at OMFIF. So OMFIF is an economic and monetary policy think tank. So our core speciality, I suppose, is central banks, and our members span from public policy to private sector. So we have asset managers, commercial banks, rating agencies, as well as public policy people within our membership. And we do research, organize events, and essentially convene the sector together to kind of talk about core issues. One of which is gender, and I'll talk you through the Gender Balance Index, which we've been doing for a number of years in a moment. But we also have a Sustainable Policy Institute, which specializes in all ESG sustainability things, which gender falls within as well. So yeah, pleasure to be here.
Thanks very much, Emma. And Minouche, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Alexander, and thank you, my fellow panelists. It's wonderful to be sharing this panel with you. So I've been in the investment space for quite some time, in private equity in particular for over a decade now. Mizane's third fund is actually a gender lens fund, a gender smart fund. It's one of the very first in the country and even in North Africa. Originally, the company was named Union Capital. 2 years ago, we decided to change the name to Mizane, which actually translates to balance in Arabic. And there's a very interesting approach to that, because companies in the region, regardless of their size, whether they're mid-cap companies, SMEs, or even larger companies, require a lot of balance on so many levels, gender among them, but also even within their capital structure when it comes to sustainability in general and their approaches to the type of products and the energy sources that they use. So we've decided to move more into that approach with a focus on gender, governance, green energy, etc. And with Mizane, Mizane Private Capital, the fund that we are launching at the moment, the main focus is on gender smart. And I'm very happy, actually, I noticed that the title of the panel is gender smart. The other term that is often used is gender lens. I prefer gender smart, because I actually think that it's extremely smart to be investing around women and supporting gender diversity and gender equity, specifically within the MENA region and the African continent in general.
Thank you so much, Minouche. And Amal.
Thank you, Alexander, and thank you everyone for joining us in this panel. I'm very happy to see that this conversation continues to build momentum, awareness, and interest from the community in the region overall, but also globally, and I think that's much needed today. My name is Amal Lainen. I am from Egypt, and I'm a partner at 500 Global. 500 is a global venture capital fund investing from the seed stage to growth stage. And what I do love about the firm, which we'll get into later, and how it's enables great access to female founders and building a very diverse portfolio, is that the leadership itself is very diverse. If you look at the CEO, COO, and GPs of 500, you find that women are highly represented. All of them are women. It almost sometimes feels like the men are the minority in the firm at the leadership level. But it has been a very fortunate place to be from a diversity perspective, and truly walking the talk. So I'm very excited to share more intel on that as we get into the discussion.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. I think we're all, very excited to hear more insights from you all. And so I would say to our audience members before we get started that you can use the Q&A function to ask any questions that you might have for our panelists. We will see if we can have time for questions after each individual presentation, and then we'll have a broader discussion at the end. So without further ado, as they say, I will hand over to Emma for the first presentation.
Thank you. Let's hope the sharing of the screen works. Okay, so what I want to talk to you about today is the Gender Balance Index. So OMFIF has been running this for 10 years, and it essentially tracks the number of senior positions held by women within central banks. So we assess central banks, public pension funds, sovereign funds, and also commercial banks. So we basically assign scores to individual institutions based on a number of women and men in senior management or board positions, with the gender value or with the greater value or weight given to the top roles, such as the governor of central banks or the chief executives of a pension fund or commercial bank, for example. So members of executive teams receive higher weights than those in non-executive roles. And the score of each institution is calculated by taking the ratio of the female and the male components. So the ultimate score is 100. So if an institution achieves a score of 100, it means that they have perfect gender balance within their organization. So we survey 5,951 individuals in 335 institutions. So that includes 185 central banks, 50 sovereign funds, and also 50 pension funds and 50 commercial banks as well. So as you can see, it is improving, but it's still far from the balance. So out of 335 institutions, 135 or 45% have improved their scores over the past 4 years. However, only 42 or 13% achieve a score of 70 or better. There have been occasional instances where 1 or 2 institutions have received a score of 100, but that's quite rare. And in our index last year, no institution scored a perfect 100. And 62 of the 335 institutions that we assess score 19% or 19% score less than 10, which shows that the gender balance there is pretty much non-existent. 34 or 10% score 0 or have no women at all on their executive teams or on their boards. So the share of women decreases with seniority. So executive committees and boards constitutes 29% are filled with women. Deputy governor or C-suite level, we're looking at 23% are filled with women. And when you get to the governor or the CEO, the top level, only 14% of the institutions that we survey have women at the top of those positions. So that breaks down to, in central banks, of the 185 that we look at, 21 of those central banks have women as governors. Of the 50 public pension funds that we assess, 13 out of the 50 have women as chief executives. Of the commercial banks that we look at, 7 of the 50 have women as CEOs or chief executives, and same for the sovereign funds, 5 of the 50 have chief executives in their remit. So central banks are displaying momentum, as you can see, with the different jurisdictions and the progress over the last 4 years. And we'll share the report hopefully after this, so you can kind of have a little bit more of an in-depth look as to the progress and how things are looking. It shows that there is progress, and of the institutions that we've surveyed, financial inclusion is seen as not to be a core policy purpose of central banks, but 66% of survey participants state that it is part of the central bank mandate, and it is something that central banks should be examining. And I think maybe in the second stage of this discussion, we can talk a little bit more into kind of what central banks themselves can specifically do to support kind of better gender inclusion and progress within the financial sector. More women are leading in central banks, so female governors are from 16 national central banks, the European Central Bank, and 4 of the Federal Reserve banks. We all know Christine Lagarde, I'm sure, leader of the ECB. Out of 26 governor appointments in the past year, 6 were women replacing men, and 3 central banks replaced women with men. So this is from our 2022 survey. There's also a big progress in terms of deputy governor appointments for women as well, which hopefully does mean that kind of as we go into the future, more governors will be appointed into that central bank position. So another important thing that we assessed, especially in 2022, is the types of roles held by senior positions, which is particularly important as well. So in 2022, we looked at whether women on executive committees or the equivalent held internal or external facing roles at pension funds, sovereign funds, and commercial banks. So this was not in central banks, this was looking at pension funds, sovereign funds, and commercial banks. So we found that between 34% and 41% of women on executive committees have internal roles, compared to 16% to 17% of men. So if you're a man on executive committee, there's a 5 in 6 chance that you'll be running a major division or a business line. And this matters, and one of the reasons we decided to look at this is because it's much more likely that an executive with experience running a major business division will join the ranks of the C-suite or take over as CEO than as someone who has run a function such as human resources, communications, marketing, for example. And there has not been much progress in this. We also looked at the representation of women in boardrooms and on executive committees, which has been relatively consistent by industry type and region. So at the moment, 30% is the benchmark for that. So 1 in 3 board members of both commercial banks and public pension funds globally are women. So sovereign funds lag behind at 23%. And this is a similar story with executive committees. So pension funds lead the way, with women accounting for 31% of executive committees members, compared to 28% of banks and 25% of sovereign funds. So all 3 groups do worse on the gender balance the higher up the leadership tree you go, which I think is a little bit of a theme of the findings in general. So I appreciate I've already spoken for quite a while. So we do then kind of have the overview of the different institutions and where they rank. So I noted already that 100 is the perfect score. So ranking for sovereign funds, the top score was 97. Ranking for pension funds as well, you can see that. And again, we'll share the report after this, so you can have a deeper look at the scores and the rankings. There's also commercial banks, which more evenly scored and did not necessarily do so well. And there's also, which again we can maybe talk about in the second stage, looking at financial inclusion strategies and the role that central banks can play with that as well. And one of the things that we found is that over half of central banks do not require firms to report gender disaggregated data, which is extremely important. And again, something that we can maybe go into in the second round. But I think I'll stop there, because I appreciate I've probably gone over time a little bit, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma. No, that was perfect timing. And yeah, I think we all want to get more into the details of this report. It's very a lot of brilliant insights there. And I was just sort of wondering whether, I mean, what's the progression you've seen? I mean, how long have you been doing the Gender Balance Index, and what are the sort of trends that you've seen there? Because I believe you're writing the 2023 one at the moment.
We are, and actually I can give you a little bit of an insight into some of the findings that we have so far within the 2023. So the general trend is that the number of women who are central bank governors, deputy governors, have increased over the 10 years that we've been doing this. So we're now doing our 10th edition. And in the 2023 findings so far, we're seeing that central bank governors have increased to 24. So that's 39%, which was on 21, which is 37%, sorry, in 2022. So that's the highest it's been in the past decade. So that's a really nice story. And in the past year, 31 banks that have changed governors, only 4 appointed a woman, which is a less positive story, unfortunately. So that's about 13%, and within this, only 3 replaced men. So the past year hasn't been the quickest progress, and there have been marginal changes with 35% of the central bank institutions have improved their gender balance by our measurement so far. Most regions have seen an improvement, barring Asia Pacific and LATAM. But I think in general that there has been progress. It's not enough, and it's not fast enough. I think that's kind of been a consistent thing throughout the 10 years that we've been doing the report, to be honest.
Got you. Yeah. And you mentioned in your presentation the importance of inclusion, financial inclusion, which I think actually takes us quite nicely to Minouche, your presentation. So I might actually, in the interest of time, hand straight over to you. Yeah.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay, so as I just mentioned, gender smart investment as an approach to inclusive growth. Just as Emma was talking a little bit about the data and the statistics, the entire MENA region is lagging behind in terms of gender gap, representation of women in leadership, even in the workforce. So we have in Egypt in particular, in the entire MENA region, fewer representation of women in the workforce in general. We only represent 5% of the 2x challenge. It's one of the lowest percentage in the entire world, and so much needs to be done to address these issues and build on the business case for gender diversity and inclusion, etc. So I always like to start with some of the facts. The numbers speak for themselves, just as Emma was presenting us with the some just general data about the indices in different parts in the world. But my focus is primarily on Africa and in Egypt. There are lots of indices as well. There's the gender gap, there's the economic participation, etc. And as you can see from the slide, Egypt is not really a top-ranked country when it comes in particular to economic participation. I think that the entire MENA region and the African continent has progressed over the years more on political participation. We have more representation of women in parliament, in government, etc. But we are still lagging behind in terms of economic participation, women business owners, women in leadership, making decisions. I don't think we have actually seen a governor of a central bank in the region so far. I'm hoping that we can see that at least within the next decade. And it's other things like that that are extremely important for women empowerment when it comes to the business and the economy. So Egypt is currently ranked 108 out of 162 countries under the UNDP Gender Inequality Index, 129 out of 156 countries under the World Economic Forum WEF, and under the Gender Gap Index, GGI, in 2021 as well. Women economic empowerment in the region is lagging, just as I mentioned, and women represent only 50% of university graduates, but only 23% of the Egyptian labor force. So 2 out of 10 women in Egypt are employed in the official economy. In Egypt as well, we have to factor in that there's the parallel economy, and there's a lot of unaccounted female employment in that parallel economy. But as far as the formal economy is concerned, we are lagging behind. 2 out of 10 women is one of the lowest female representation in the workforce in the world. And the majority of the low numbers come from the MENA region in particular. Some of the other facts why there is a compelling and very important business case when it comes to gender diversity. So research indicates that investing in women in Egypt and empowering women could take around 3.8 million people out of poverty by 2030. It could enhance the GDP of the country by 34%. And it can support so many other things when it comes to innovation, when it comes to the unemployment rate, and also the profitability and the performance of companies. So companies founded by women, and this is global statistics, deliver 2 times as much revenue per dollar invested. And I'm sure that Amal is going to touch a little bit on that, specifically in the startup and the venture capital space. Companies with 2 women on boards, and this is based on an IFC research report conducted on over 3,000 Egyptian companies, both privately held and listed companies, deliver higher ROE, higher ROA, and higher ROS. And it's actually not very insignificant numbers. We're talking about a difference of 4%. We're talking about a difference of 5%. And with certain sizes of companies, this could be a huge difference, actually. And women globally manage only 8% of the global assets under management, yet it is also proven by numerous research, IFC part of the research that has been conducted, that when you have gender diversity on the fund manager and women in the investment committee and in the leadership of fund managers are represented by 30%, these fund managers deliver a 20% higher return than the all-male teams. 20% in the investment space. It's a significant amount, and it's not something to be taken lightly. We have to really reflect and understand the importance and the economic value and profitability that is created by higher female representation. The actions based on the numbers, sorry, I skipped a slide. The actions that are based on the numbers that we are seeing. So I've divided them into 3 particular lines. I mean, I'm in the private equity space. There's so much that can be done to ensure gender equality, women empowerment, and diversity in so many areas. But I want to focus on my particular area, which is private equity. First of all, private equity in general delivers and helps company create value, grow faster. It supports governance, etc. So adding to that, private equity can also play a very important and significant role when it comes to gender diversity and gender smart investment. And we've seen that trend globally. The number of funds that are focusing on gender lens, including gender lens and gender diversity as part of its top objectives, are increasing. The number of investors that are pouring money into that space are also increasing. So private equity can play a very important role. And the more funds that I think personally we have in Egypt, in the MENA region, the better, because it will support the business case. It will attract more money into supporting female entrepreneurs and supporting companies also as well to integrate women and to become more diverse. But also on the other part, I think that there has to be some kind of focus on mid-cap and SME companies in particular. They represent a very large part, 80% of the GDP in Egypt, for instance. They create 62% of jobs in the US, over 70% of jobs in emerging market, etc. So if we focus on SMEs and on mid-cap companies to support and promote gender diversity, the value that can be created could be even more. And SMEs can deliver the higher returns, the higher profitability, support the business case even further. At Mizan in particular, our focus about what is considered gender smart is quite flexible. Because this fund is focused primarily on Egypt, and we want to make sure that we have a diverse pipeline that can allow us to invest as flexibly as possible into several companies. And we follow the CDC and the two times challenge criteria for what constitutes as gender smart investment. But one of the things that we also did, and I'm happy to share with you that report at the end of the session, is that prior to launching the fund, we co-authored a practitioner's brief about the strategies that can be followed that are very specific to the needs and the gaps within the Egyptian corporate space. Actually this brief is available online, Gender Smart Investing in Region. It was very specific to Egypt, and we have actually a case study on a fintech company called PayMob, following exactly what PayMob has adopted and looking at replicating that model and the value that has been created within that company. But what most importantly this practitioner brief provides us is that it provides us with very specific strategies that anyone can actually follow, not specifically a company that is part of the portfolio of Mizan, that follows under these strategies. There's specific policies that can be adopted, and this is why we've made that public, because we want as many companies, as many small size companies, mid-sized companies to adopt some of these strategies to address specifically the needs and the gaps that they have within their corporation. I want to share with you some of the smaller findings that we realized, for instance, that are very simple and yet eye-opening. So one of the things that we've realized while we were surveying the companies and producing that piece of the practitioner's brief is that we've realized that most of the local corporations, no matter how big they're, simple, adopting a training to move from just policies that are there within the drawers of their desks and take them into training the people more into understanding what exactly is needed is extremely important. And I think that something like that is actually also much more needed when you have blue-collar workers employed in some of these factories who probably need more training, more specific training on what can constitute and what can be considered as a sexual harassment. I think I'm done, and I'm happy to take any questions, but let me stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Minouche. That was brilliant to have those insights on the SME space and also the private equity space. I mean, you don't hear actually gender smart finance being talked about so much in that space, right? We often hear it within the VC space, we hear it within corporates, but within private equity, not so much. What I might suggest, just in terms of timing, is that actually we'll take all the questions at the end. And have a broader discussion with everyone. And so, Amal, I wonder if I might be able to pass over to you for the third of the presentations, and then we can launch straight into a discussion, because I've got lots of questions that I want to ask, but I'm sure I'll let our audience ask some too.
which is why, you know me, I usually keep it short and sweet for everyone so we can jump right into the discussion. So I won't be sharing a presentation. I think I'll just share the high-level insights that we've, based on the roundtables that we conducted last December, around October of last year. We did 3 roundtables. One was for female founders in Egypt who share their experiences with regards to not just fundraising, but challenges in building their own businesses. We opened up the discussion after to allow for venture capital funds and investors to also share their experiences investing in female founders and have that brutal truth from both sides sort of shared, unfiltered. And then we had an investors-only roundtable with the accelerators as well to share where their struggles are coming from when it comes to investing in women-led businesses and businesses providing access for women. And some of the findings are very much built on what Emma and Bruce had already said. You know, basically, it starts from the very top too, right? So if you have more women represented as LPs, and you have more women represented in investment funds with decision-making powers, not just, you know, associates or even principals that are not on the ICMs, not having investment decision-making authorities, that really trickles down into how many female founders get funded and female-led businesses. And the whys are quite obvious at this point, right? That because we tend to invest in people that are more like us, more like it or not. When you have more female representation in the firm, you are more likely to source female founders. You are more likely to understand even the opportunities. And the number of times that a male investor will be like, I don't understand like why baby products are such a thing. I'm like, really? Do you know how much people are willing to spend on their babies? So it's a very simple, like anecdotal, but it, you know, you get the idea of why it's more approachable. You know, female investors are more approachable, female founders, and they also understand the opportunity and the challenges in building it. They are more capable of understanding the risks of these businesses and mitigating accordingly. On the other side, there are a lot of things that we've uncovered in terms of what female founders struggle with. A lot of it has to do with, yes, access to finance, but in order to solve for that access to finance, it's about, you know, shifting cultures on both ends. So female founders tend to be a lot more conservative in approaching investors. They want to get it right from the get-go. The men will go even when their ideas are half baked, you don't have all the answers yet, but they're very, very visionary and ambitious, and that's what investors buy into, sort of the ambition that they have. If you tell me you're going to take over the world, I want to invest in that. I don't want to invest in the person who's like, maybe you'll be able to, you know, reach X target by the end of the month, but to be super conservative, I'm just going to say like X-2 because I don't want to mislead, and that's what women typically do. So what we gathered in the end, like sort of in terms of what can be done better, is definitely more discussions between both. So we focus on, you know, having more networking events that are also at times that are convenient for female founders. So because a lot of investors are like, well, I'm all the events, like I never meet female founders, like where's the pipeline? And I'm like, well, have you met them for breakfast? Have you met them in the morning? Which is much more suitable for a lot of women instead of networking events that start after 7 p.m., 8 p.m., which is typical. So this week I was on a panel with the ISC Women's Arabia, and one of the male investors was like, wow, there are 100 female founders in the region. And it's like, these were the founders that were selected to be here. There are thousands more in the region. But they were honestly quite surprised to meet 100 female founders. And that's something that we can change by building those gatherings. And the other thing is matchmaking with investors, opening up networks for both ends. And lastly, on, you know, again, the behavioral changes such as negotiation skills for female founders, pitching skills, fundraising, and recruiting and building as well, because I think all female founders also struggle with building their teams. So these were some of the important takeaways where accelerators, investors, and founders can do better to make it a more equitable market. I'll stop there. I know you're looking at me with like the timer going on and on. We still have 20 minutes for questions.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Amal. And yes, that leaves a nice time for discussion. I think it's so interesting hearing the importance of creating those spaces and actually how simple the answer, like the solution can be, right? If you have the right data and you've actually had those conversations with women about what would actually work, rather than sort of creating these sort of pie in the sky strategies that don't actually consider the needs. But I might sort of start the discussion with a question to you, Amal, and then Minouche and Emma, it'd be great to get your views on this. But there was an interesting, you were talking about, women investors being more likely to invest in female-led startups, and that being important to create a sort of ripple effect, as it were. There was an interesting study recently by INSEAD that said that actually the sort of oft-accepted recommendation that pairing female founders, with female investors and putting, women in VCs, delegating the sort of female-led startups to them, can actually create a new bias that could threaten future funding for those startups. So, because it gives that idea that they just got the investment because they went to a female founder or something. So I wondered, sort of from all of your experiences, what do you think the most effective approach is for financial institutions? Is it that providing women mentors to support the advancement of women in the industry, or actually do we need to think also about how we mainstream women's representation across the board so that it creates a more inclusive culture as a whole?
Yes, what I think is more important is diversity. Like, I love that you, Alexander, are an advocate for this, for gender smart investing and for inclusion in general, right? Like, if we were all women here, this is not going anywhere, because we project our own biases too, right? So I think it's important to have diversity in investment committees and in LPs at every point, and whether it's the investment in any investment firm as well as the companies, is to have the diversity, because it checks out our own views of the world, and that's what really matters. I don't think at some point female investment professionals investing in female founders, not because how many female founders can I personally in one firm invest in? I don't want to be that female advocate all the time, but I can be the person on an investment committee that provides a different perspective. Like when we're, my male partners can source opportunities, I can, assess whether this makes sense or not, and then provide my perspective. But it shouldn't be just on the female professionals to solve for that problem. That one cause should. What I hope that to get to is like what you said, is mainstreaming this conversation no longer exists. Like, there are females well represented in the investment community, as well as in the businesses that we don't talk about necessarily. We get to a point where we don't talk about female founders or not, like successful businesses led by diverse teams.
Yeah, and promoting that kind of diversity and mainstreaming is so important, especially when men tend to be the gatekeepers to a lot of these positions. I mean, Minouche, I think it would be really interesting to get a bit more of an understanding of how this is all happening in the private equity space. As I said before, I don't think we hear so much about that. And also, I got to say to the audience members, please do send some questions in the chat
Okay, so I think one of the main differences why it happens more in the VC space, because there's a strong need to support female founders, and a lot of these female entrepreneurs in different parts, in tech and in other spaces as well, need support, and they go to the venture capital firms to raise funds, etc. I think we've seen a wave within the private equity of more general sustainable investment rather than gender specific. But to be very honest, I think the trend is going to start changing. We should be seeing more private equity move into that space, and we're starting to see actually more gender lens in the mutual fund space. And several of the larger hedge funds and the larger asset managers are now creating gender lens funds to invest in liquid and listed stocks. So the trend is going to start picking up. And I think that it has to do with a better understanding. It has to do with so the private equity needs to understand what exactly should we be doing? Should we be only backing female leadership, or should it be more holistic and more general, like the approach that we're taking, for instance, because it has to do with returns to investors, it has to do with the pool of the potential transactions that you can be looking at, and also the companies, the target of these companies, and their understanding of why gender lens is important. You can have not really much female representation in the leadership, but we've seen, for instance, with Mizan, that you have a lot of companies in specific industries that employ 30 and 40% of their workforce women, and that definitely is considered a gender lens investment if we use that and we build on it. I'm hoping that as you see more funds coming in, going through the entire cycle, it will attract more into that space. But also you have to factor in that it's a little bit tricky for the male fund managers to set up funds with a gender lens, because you have to actually adopt what you are trying to promote. So you need to bring in more women into the private equity space. You have more women in the venture capital space, but less so in the private equity space. So as more women start working into the private equity space, they will probably, just as the case exists for venture capital, move into setting up funds with a gender lens angle and a gender smart perspective.
Thank you. And I think it's, what you're saying about having both top level management and sort of mid-level positions for women is super important. I mean, Emma, this is something that we've spoken about, and you were saying that the more senior, from the gender balance index, the more senior you go, the fewer women there are, and there are lots of reasons I can think of for why that might happen. And what have your experiences been? How can we promote that more holistic approach to women's representation?
Yeah, and I completely agree with Amal and Manoush on the focus being also on men and involving men in this. So one of the things that we've kind of been discussing with some of our central bankers is kind of getting both male and female leaders being mentors and sponsoring women throughout their careers, creating diversity networks for your employees, which also then looks at kind of leadership and kind of managing the gender balance. Also looking at the implementation of work-life balance measures and kind of how that can support the encouragement of women to apply for managerial positions. And that's one of the things that we kind of see is a key element when women are looking to kind of go up the ladder. And one of the things we're looking at with the 2023 Gender Balance Index report, which I mentioned before, is that you kind of have a lot of equality up until the point of senior mid-level management, and then it starts to drop off. And that's obviously, we all know why that is. Women sort of take breaks for, having their families, having babies, and it's about kind of encouraging them coming back into that space. Another thing is looking at kind of creating diversity ambassadors among managers in different departments within your corporation as well, and having men also have responsibility for that. So to having accountability and leading on those diversity leadership and diversity aspects, and also kind of establishing programs to coach and track the progress of females within that sector. And central banks specifically, one of the things that they can do, and one of the things that they do is central banks are analyzers, right? So they look at a lot of the data that the financial sector are doing. So using gender disaggregated data, so asking the financial sector to basically report on their gender measurements and kind of getting that data, which specifically shows where women are positioned, means that they can then help supervise and inform policy and develop a kind of national strategy to encourage firms to basically look at kind of the products that they're developing for women and how they're supporting women do that. However, only like 64% of respondents to our survey said that their country has a national strategy to do that and to kind of drive financial inclusion. So again, we still have quite a way to go. And just 40% of the respondents that we surveyed have created female-focused programs within a national strategy. So again, still quite a big way to go, but it gives that understanding of kind of how customers can access and use their financial services. And maybe I can go a little bit more into that, but I'll pass back to you.
No, and I mean, when you're talking about the family leave, and we get into the social norm space and the sort of that societal side of it all, and I mean, I don't know, from the Egyptian perspective, like on the government side, have you seen sort of policies, initiatives coming in that have been successful in sort of increasing women in leadership, women across the board? Yeah, I mean, Amal or Minouche, which either of you would like to take that?
I think I'll say, and I'm just going to add to it, I think, again, representation matters. So one of the great things that we're seeing happening in Egypt is the number of women ministers in government, not just as ministers, but also judges across government entities. We're seeing more and more women representation, and I think that matters a lot to build confidence and equity among decision makers, but also among young women starting their careers, to see, that the opportunities that are possible within policies. There have been a number of policies as well to advocate or to level the playing field. More can be done, but there are for more female representation on boards, especially for public listed companies and financial services companies, pushing for SME financing for women-led businesses, and I think Manoj can add more on some of those policy changes, but there is an effort. I think we can definitely expand more on these efforts.
Yeah.
So the Central Bank of Egypt, and prior to that, the Financial Regulatory Authority issued a decree necessitating that all listed companies plus all companies that are regulated by the FRA should have at least 2 women represented on its board. I think a year after that, or possibly 2 years after that, the Central Bank of Egypt followed suit. And it was either 2 women or 25% representation. And we've seen more representation at a board level. I think adding on to what Emma was talking about, I think we're missing general data reporting. So when, for instance, when we were working on our practitioner brief, we had to go to individual banks and have them fill out our own questionnaire to know the percentage of women in the leadership, the percentage of women overall in the bank, etc. And we've done that with some of the larger corporations and some of the larger listed companies. But when it comes to general reporting, I think this some institutions do that, but it has to come more and be pushed by the regulator. The FRA has adopted, I think, some aspects of data reporting, but when it comes to general ESG, but not gender specific, but I mean, my own analysis is that probably it's they don't want to be putting out these numbers out there. This is my own interpretation. Don't quote me on it, because once you start doing that, you have a benchmark, and you have a benchmark that has to improve over time. In certain instances, we do have in a lot of the companies in Egypt and in different parts of emerging markets, there's a higher turnover when it comes to female employment. So once you report that this is that you have 30%, specifically in one of the top institutions or top banks in Egypt, it won't really look good that 2 years down the road you have only 20%, etc. So, but I think that we need to push for this kind of reporting, and it has to be done, because it will start shedding light on where we need to focus and where the attention has to start going.
Absolutely. So I think sex disaggregated data is so vital across financial institutions. And actually, we have a question from Deborah in the chat on whether actually that disaggregation of data is included in that financial inclusion strategy from the CBE. I see, having read it, I can't remember if it was. I don't remember seeing sex disaggregated data as a major component in that financial inclusion strategy when I read it, but maybe I missed something. But Minouche or Amal, do you remember whether it was included there? It wasn't. No. Oh. Well,
no, it was exactly what just as I was saying. We had to, I mean, when we were looking at we had to go to the banks because we couldn't get it from the central bank. We couldn't get it from the Federation of Egyptian Banks. We had to go to each individual bank and we had to pull some strings for them to provide us this data. It wasn't something that was that easy to come across.
Yeah. Well, just because I'm looking at the time, what I might do is just ask each of you to give an example of a champion, a financial institution that you really see as sort of paving the way, that's proved itself as a leader. Emma, I'm sure I might go straight to you because you've got your index. But I think it would be lovely to have, we've spoken a lot about the challenges and what needs to be done. So it'd be nice to sort of end with sort of 3 beacons that you guys have worked with or experienced.
Yeah. So we have a number of women kind of at the forefront of driving inclusion, and as I kind of mentioned, there have been a number of first females. So the OCBC Bank appointed Helen Wong as its first female CEO. Ida Waldenbach is the Norway's first female central bank governor, and she became the governor in 2020. We've also had Hannah Al-Rastamani, who's become the first female CEO of the first Abu Dhabi bank, which I think is a really fantastic thing. And there's been a number of new programs and new initiatives that's been announced within central banks as well. So the Bank of England has launched a Meeting Varied People initiative, which is aimed at engaging a kind of more diverse range of individuals and institutions within the financial sector. The State Bank of Vietnam, which is really nice. We kind of mentioned that actually the kind of Asia Pacific region is one of the regions where maybe we do lag behind, has partnered with the International Finance Committee to promote women's leadership in the banking sector, which is over an 18-month period. And another example of the UAE, the UAE Central Bank has initiated a program aimed at advancing female representation in leadership positions as well, which is partnered with a social enterprise, and they're basically looking at the exchange of information and building a stronger pipeline of female talent among their boardrooms as well. So hopefully that's a few positive.
Yeah, wonderful positive thing. More than maybe we would have expected at the beginning of the webinar. Minouche, I have one rule: you're not allowed to say Mezan. You're not allowed to say Mezan as your champion. So it is a champion.
actually, to be very honest, I think I have more female role models rather than one single institution, at least in Egypt, that is because the data and everything reflects that we're not there yet. We're actually far from there. But there's so many women that I think have set standards for women like me in the banking industry, in the business community, etc. I mean, one of the role models that come to mind is Mona Zulfouar, a very well-known lawyer across the entire Middle East, and she's actually the non-executive chairman of EFG Hermes, which is a listed company on the stock exchange, one of the largest investment banks in the entire region. And she's a wonderful role model, and I always look up to her, and I've had the privilege of actually working with her at different times during my career. There's also Mona Yassin, who was one of the very first vice chairman of a public sector bank. She's retired at the moment, but she was vice chairman of Bank Masr, which is the second largest bank in Egypt, a public sector bank. She joined the bank at a very difficult times, and she was part of the turnaround that was done in that bank. There's also one within the investment space, Naveen Al-Tahri. She's a serial entrepreneur. She set up 2-3 companies in the investment space, in the private equity space, and I also look up to her. And a lot of these women serve on boards at the moment, so they're giving back and they're mentoring a lot of other women and men as well, about gender diversity and the important role that women can play in business and in leadership.
Thank you. And Amal, it's so great to hear these names, you know, it's so important to hear.
Yes, it is very encouraging to see so many role models that we've all had the privilege to encounter, even as just from a distance, to see their achievements. And since I can't say 500, which I highly admire as a gender champion, I will say the institutions that are signed up for the 2X challenge, I think all of them have committed to gender smart investing, and as well as all, honestly, so many gender lens funds across Africa and the Middle East, like Ventures in Jordan and many more in Africa, that are really, doing their part, and more than doing their part, but fighting the battle to move the needle. One role model that I will leave you with is Minou Shafi, who was previously the president of the London School of Economics, my alma mater, and now is the first women president of Columbia University. And if you haven't read her book before, I highly recommend it, which is What We Owe Each Other. Highly recommend it.
Fantastic. I'm walking away from this panel discussion with a book recommendation too.
The next one will be a book club, so read the book for our book club discussion.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for participating in this panel discussion. Thank you to the audience for joining. And Gabi, I'll hand over to you for the wrap up.
Yeah. Thank you so much. What we owe each other, what I owe you. So a massive thank you for this amazing session highlighting how important the economic value of gender smart finance is, how important it is to have data collection to prove. And we were talking about role models. So my huge thank you goes out to Alexander for this utmost inspirational moderation. Emma, Minouche, Amal, it's been amazing to be with you and to listen to you and to learn from you. A massive thank you. We truly are indebted, and there is more to come on gender smart finance. So please make a big note in your calendar. On March 22nd, same time, same format, same spirit, and same moderator. Alexander, thank you so much for having accepted already that you're going to be our next moderator. There will be more gender smart finance, from awareness to action. Again, expect amazing speakers, inspiring discussions, and the journey continues. So hope you will join us again. We will keep you posted. We will post this session on YouTube channel. So please feel free to share, and hope to join us again. So in the meantime, stay well, safe and healthy, and a big, big shukran and thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Gabi. Thank you, Alexander.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks.